This series is part of a series that we are very proud to be doing with the team at VCU Qatar in run-up to the Tasmeem conference. So I will pass it over to Basma Hamdi, one of the co-directors, to tell you about that.
Thanks, Mikey. Hello, everyone. My name is Basma Hamdi, and I am one of the 4 co-directors of Tasmeem Doha 2022 Radical Futures. On behalf of my co-directors, Dr. Daniil Emmons, Dr. Diane Durr, and Maysa Al-Mu'min, I would like to express how honored and excited we are for this collaboration with Al-Fikra. Together, we have designed a series of conversations leading up to Tasmeem in March. Some of these topics included the future of decolonization, the future of education, the future of the Arab image. So go back and watch these episodes, which are available online, and watch out for our new episodes coming up on the future of language, the future of typography, the future of food, among others. We are honored and excited to be joined by 2 of the leading duos in design in the Manassa region, Rania Ghosn and Hadi Al-Jazairy from DesignEarth, and Ghalia Srakbi and Lauren Alexander from Foundland. A bit about Tasmeem. Tasmeem Doha is an international Biennale art and design conference hosted and organized by VCU Arts Qatar since 2004. Each edition of Tasmeem Doha highlights a unique and contemporary theme within art and design, exploring novel concepts, methods, and applications, and engaging in critical discussions. The event is open to the public, with attendees and participants consisting of international designers, artists, academics, students, industry professionals, and the local community. The 2022 conference, Radical Futures, addresses the role of design in shaping the future. Tasmeem Doha 2022 Radical Futures is an inclusive and multifaceted view of the future, one that not only speculates on technological advancements, but on future threats and changes, whether environmental, geographical, cultural, or social. Now more than ever, we must ask pertinent questions, raise critical dialogues, and respond with clarity. Thank you.
Okay, great. So with that, I'm going to get started with the talk. So welcome everybody for this live recording of our conversation with the Tasmeem series, Radical Futures. This conversation is about the future of design. I'm honored to have 4 leading figures from the world of design. The first 2 are from the collective DesignEarth. Rania Ghosn is an associate professor of architecture and urbanism at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, as well as Hadi Jazairy is an associate professor of architecture and the director of the Master of Urban Design at the University of Michigan. Together, they are founding partners of the practice DesignEarth. Welcome, everybody. And then on the Foundland collective, Ghalia Al-Srakbi is based, or was based in the Netherlands until 2014 before relocating to Cairo, Egypt, where she teaches at the American University. After completing a master's in design at the Sandberg Institute, Amsterdam, she followed her research postgraduate. She followed a research postgraduate at Jan van Eyck Academy in Holland, I believe. Lauren Alexander lives and works in Amsterdam. After completing a master's in design at the Sandberg Institute Amsterdam, she pursued an MFA at the Dutch Art Institute in Arnhem, I want to say. She tutors in graphic design, bachelor and master's programs of the Royal Academy of Arts in The Hague, as well as at the University of Underground Master Program at the Sandberg Institute. Welcome everybody to this conversation. So we are 5 people on this panel, so there's going to be a lot of unmuting and muting and interrupting. So please bear with us, audience members out there in the world. So I'll try my best at asking questions directly to folks. But let's start with the title of this conversation, The Future of Design. What a lofty question that is. So let's start. At least I'll go in the order that I read the bios. So Rania, I'm going to ask you for a direct question. Do you describe yourself as a designer?
Okay, it's a good thing I have my coffee nearby. This is not starting in any kind of progressive way. Future design and, well, the practice is called DesignEarth. So we've coined and accepted and practiced our work as designers. And in that, engaged kind of an expanded agency of design that reaches out to scales that are typically across various disciplinary divisions, so across urbanism, landscape, engineering, regional planning, to kind of aspire to think of the earth as a site and a concern for design. So some of this is fueled by various disciplinary trainings. I'm personally kind of a geographer by training, an architect, and I have a degree, a doctorate of design, so I might as well accept it as a broader umbrella without much necessarily disciplinary feuds that go into that. So I would not necessarily defend kind of a degree on a kind of an exclusivity ground. I think it's the same premises as the podcast, one that is open, inclusive, but it's a useful discipline from which for us to think of these concerns, and for various reasons. And I'm happy to go into that in details if you would like me to.
Yeah. Well, let me bring in Ghalia and Lauren. I'm curious. The reason why I want to talk about this is because when we chose Foundland and DesignEarth as folks we wanted to have on this this panel, I realized that when I looked into the work that both duos are doing, I wouldn't necessarily have described them as, oh, this is what design looks like. And that, as I said before the call, probably says more about me than it does about the work and sort of my own limitations. But internally, Lauren and Ghalia, are you both thinking about your work within the sort of broader umbrella as design work, quote unquote design work?
Should I start, Lauren?
Yeah, go for it. Lauren, interrupt Ghalia at any
I'm unmuted. Well, it depends what do you think of what design means nowadays. I think if a closer observation of what's really happened to the design practice in the last 15 years, and if you look about what kind of design projects designers produce and what kind of topics designers are involved in, you see a huge development in the design practice. So we are designers. We are trained as graphic designers. So just to put this side note. But we belong to the generation that we believe that designers could be also involved in knowledge generating knowledge, not only concerned with form and aesthetics of whatever projects we are working on. So we kind of like followed that path that design should be open, multidisciplinary, should be also like considering other practices, other collaboration, new collaborations, and also new expand the horizon for the practice, as I might say. I don't know if Lauren.
Lauren, do you agree?
Yeah, well, I think it's difficult for Rania and I to really separate ourselves in some senses from the practice of design, because both of us are very much involved with design curriculums at different schools. I'm sitting inside my school right now at the Royal Academy of Arts, and Rania is also teaching at the American University or leading also the graphic design department. So I think the things that we think about also in designing programs for students, where let's say the palette that we have is media, typography, storytelling, etc., is something that we also, those are the tools that we use, and I think we still are quite active in using, even if our practice is somewhat dislocated from a traditional design practice. But yeah, I would agree with Rania in the sense that we also are now thinking of teaching curriculum that can support the idea of designers who want to work independently for the purpose of their own research projects, or for the purpose of generating knowledge within the field that is not necessarily only related to design practice or servicing clients, but also connects to other fields beyond the design practice. So yeah, I think I feel like we're very much connected to design, but indeed, if one were to look at our projects, we've definitely shown a lot of them within the artistic world as well. So that's often where we've kind of found a really receptive audience to the kind of projects that we are working on. But I don't think it's exclusive to only the artistic domain. So also practices of film festivals and things like that have also been outlets for our work.
Okay, I'm going to try to ping pong a little bit around. So I want to start with DesignEarth. If we can talk about some of the more recent projects that have just come out. In particular, I want to talk a little bit about Geostories, a book that I believe was just published, if I have that right.
Well, the third edition will be published in 2022. It was first published in 2018. So
this type of project, if you can just, Hadi, maybe I'll have you jump in. If you can just give a brief overview of where the idea of this project started and why this was something that you wanted to spend time on.
Yeah, Miki, absolutely. I'd like to say that for us, design is you know, as a kind of framework for our work. Design is key, but you know, DesignEarth is first of all the intersection of design and you know global issues and climate issues in particular, and trying to find you know how we could through disciplinary frameworks think about the climate challenges ahead. You know, through urban design, through architecture, landscape architecture, how can we, you know, find the tools to address the global issues as they relate to climate change? Mm-hmm. And these do not exist at the moment. You know, the 10 lines of Joan Busquets in urban designs are probably not enough to be able to address, you know, sea level rise or you know, exceptional earthquakes or you know, temperature changes. So for us, the starting point was to start to think about, you know, how can design, you know, think about some of these issues. And the beginning of the project needs to be connected with an earlier project, which is New Geographies. So New Geographies is the publication that was founded at the GSD by 7 doctoral students, and Rania and I were 2 of the 7 students. And the goals of that publication was to start to address, you know, some of the key issues of addressing global issues through you know, through disciplinary frameworks and ways to maybe reform, ways to reorient, you know, these discussions using, you know, current concerns.
Yeah.
So maybe I would just add on to this title in particular that, I mean, it stems from the belief and the practice that the crisis of the climate that we're currently living in is not only a crisis of the physical environment, although that's very significant, present, experienced, lived unevenly, but still so. But it's also a crisis of the cultural environment, of the various systems of representations through which we've come to imagine, represent, narrate the earth. Yeah. So such stories in particular of technological systems, be they energy, trash, are often addressed in managerial terms. And what we're proposing is that there is a capacity for the design project, in this case, through its various forms of representations, but also in assemblies and public space, to begin to address, and the tool for this book is speculative narratives, is the modality of narrating the persistent risks of technology through a kind of a forward-looking that thinks of both how we've come here, but how can we think of other possible worlds? And that takes form in the kind of architectural drawing. And there's a series of 14. So this is not the kind of a definitive one story, but kind of various short stories, maybe short projects to begin to maybe ask the questions rather than necessarily provide the answers on what are the issues, what are the tropes that could be redefined or thought of differently.
Well, that's what struck me about this project. And I really think what strikes me about your work is that, and I'll harken back to a previous guest on one of the Radical Futures podcasts that we've had in the past, Dana Abdullah, who suggested that the struggle with education, the way design is taught, is that it's focusing on just teaching solutions. And in fact, it's manufacturing these robots who just create the same solutions over and over and over again. And that is creating a disservice for the world. And in fact, we need to teach folks how to start identifying the problems worth solving.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you're trying to get at with your broader work, which is, let's take a step back before we decide to start prescribing solutions and get to the fact that we may be looking at all the wrong problems.
Yes, absolutely. I think geography or the Earth or Gaia was in the background for many years. So we're thinking about, construction, technology, modernization, growth, development, and Gaia was always sitting in the background, really, very passive background. And Isabel Stengers talks about the intrusion of Gaia.
Suddenly, for those of us who don't know, what is Gaia?
Gaia is the earth, is the goddess of the earth, is a mythological figure that is sort of talking about the earth. And suddenly the earth, and coming with a particular crisis, intrudes into our everyday lives, but also into our disciplines. We have to talk about climate change. We have to talk about the impossible limitless growth. And this is when we shift the stories, when we shift to geostories, when it is the stories about the earth, because it's about our finitude within this framework of climate threats.
Yeah, and I think in our kind of maybe politics of citation, because geostories is kind of a keyword that the French philosopher Bruno Latour uses in one of his work. And I think what you were pointing to in terms of pedagogy is inspired also by a similar invitation to a shift from what he calls matters of fact to matters of concern. And I think later feminist thinkers would take it to become matters of care, that we move things from kind of clearly formulated problems that have their immediate solutions to begin to think of them as issues that beg scales, formalities of response, to eventually not only presenting them as cognitive matters to be related to kind of in a cerebral way, but as things we begin to relate to, care about, feel invested in, and act on. So I think there's a shift in the way that the project is articulated from across these domains. And we've clearly, we've seen a couple of images, one drawings, the previous one from a project called Of Oil and Ice, which in the scale of thinking about the earth thinks of questions of what we think of as scarcity in one domain, and hence the imperative of desalination, say in the Gulf countries, with kind of an overabundance of melting in other parts of the world, maybe specifically in continents such as Antarctica, who, although kind of ruled by a series of, clearly divided into a pie by international organization, lack a clear voice, a clear representation. So I think the term representation comes to matter both in its political and in aesthetic domain, both as kind of a sense of voice, a political assembly, but also a question of visibility in aesthetic domain. So that's a kind of a short story in a series of frames that tracks the crack and melting of one iceberg from Antarctica, where it's stowed into the UAE, melted into kind of a reserve of fresh water. And as science fiction-y as that story sounds, it actually departs from an actual episode that happened in the 70s at an academic conference that happened at Iowa State University at an initiative by a Saudi entrepreneur, actually exploring the possibility of towing icebergs at cost less than that of desalination, with increasing costs of energy and kind of environmental externalities. So it's a way of somehow twisting stories that otherwise might be separated to begin to speak of all of them, rather than kind of narrowly framing onto one specific geography.
Yeah. It begins to like broaden the calculus, where we start to understand that the calculus is much larger.
Yeah.
So I want to talk, and this could be a good pivot into bringing in Lauren and Ghalia. When you, in your classrooms, all of you are educators, and I used to be an educator. I think about this a lot. In your classrooms, how do incoming freshmen or 18-year-olds or 20-year-olds or 19-year-olds who are interested in studying design, how do they interact with this sort of broader definition of what design it may be or maybe should be? Lauren, I see your sort of eyebrows going back up and forth. Do you have any thoughts on this? I'm curious how your students respond to this when they are confronted with work that is, you know, much just more expansive.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good one, because I do think that students are exposed to so much and see so much, especially on social media, that actually I don't think that sort of looking at the images that are produced through the projects that we are making, I don't think that it's particularly jarring for them that design might not look like advertising, for example, because this is maybe what could be the preconception. But at the same time, I do think that, something we're constantly thinking about is also how to explain the behind the scenes story of the project itself, and to clearly communicate what the research is that goes into this, to have to not sort of judge only on imagery, but also search a little bit further for the story behind that, let's say, because I think there's a tendency to kind of like via Instagram, etc., to really like just judge purely on the visual aesthetic, but not really read as much, for example, related to what the research actually is. So, I mean, in that sense, I think, well, now I'm looking at a different project on the screen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Should I hop to something else?
No, keep on going. I'm curious, could you actually like put a little meat on the bone? What do you mean by that? This idea of sharing the research, like what does that actually look like?
Well, I guess the process that the design student would go through, and also, let's say, teaching methods of exposing your design process, I think is really important. To find tools of mapping and so on, to explain your thinking, that also enables you to share that and to distribute your research. So yeah, to move away from the idea that, with the logic of advertising, that, you know, an image sells, rather to see it in a more discursive way, I think can also be a challenge, and something that can also expose the kind of critical thinking of that student, rather than just a kind of pure judgment on aesthetics. But this is something that I think, where I am now in The Hague, we have an international group of students coming from all over the world. So that it also takes quite a while before we can all get on the same page. And this is also why I think it's important to expose the process, because, what we try to work on actively in the program here is that we do not revert to kind of standards of a Eurocentric perception of what design teaching, and kind of whether that be even in typography, where there might be a default to go to Swiss typography as like the grid and the, you know, all the ingredients, that we think actively about other ways of approaching that, and different systems of logic that we could possibly tap into or discuss or talk about in design classes.
Ghalia, if for you, your classroom, I would imagine, at least from a perspective, from the perspective of the student's perspective, I would imagine is slightly more homogeneous at the University of Cairo. Maybe not. I don't know the university intimately, so correct me, please, if I'm wrong. But I would imagine that it's a slightly more homogeneous group. What is that process like?
Most of my students are Egyptian. So I think
Egypt is huge. It's 120 million people.
True. I teach at the American University, so in a way it's a private university, so I'm teaching also like specific segments of the specific class, specific segments. But I think we are as educators here, we are facing different kind of problems. I think our main focus is how to contextualize design, how to make design, how design can make sense in a city like Cairo or a country like Egypt. our main focus is to teach students what story to tell, what's worth telling, how to configure their relation as designer to their communities, to what's really happening in their surrounding. So in a way, we have a lot of work to do because, as Lauren said, we have a bigger issue that we are used to teach curricula that is completely imported from the West. It started to really not making any sense that you are teaching those rules, those curricula, and also those. So, for example, I open conversation with my students why we need to design posters in a city that there is no a proper public space to put posters, where it's impossible for any poster in the world to be visible. So maybe we need to think about different tools. What kind of stories, what kind of themes do we need to bring also inside classrooms? So now we are really interested in environment and water, how actually we can activate archives, how we can access archives, how we can use design to create multiple narratives, liberate actually our the stories from the official narratives, or maybe from colonial narratives. We have a lot of things to do, and I think design has a lot to do in that field, how to tell stories, what kind of stories. I think designers, especially young designers, they started also to understand that this kind of transition of their roles, what they are capable of doing as well.
So you talked about this idea of European curricula that teaching those in an Egyptian environment, and how it might not actually be applicable. But we have 5 different locations on this call, right? Both of you are collectives, but you're not collecting right now, right? So I'm curious how Rania and Hadi, does that resonate with both of you as well? Both of you teach in the US right now. You teach, I'm sure, students from all over the world. But did what Ghalia just mentioned, do you see that as being a sort of fundamental shortcoming of design programs everywhere, and even one of the sort of fundamental shortcomings that you both are trying to combat in your own classrooms?
Yeah, okay. Mikey, do you mind going back a couple of slides, maybe to the after oil slide? I think it kind of helps explicate some of the pedagogic work that is involved. So I think, there's both a regional focus and I think kind of some persistent pushback against what we've come to call a violence of abstraction. But I guess one in, the heart of the imperial project has been one in terms of accruing value to the center, while dispossessing peripheries, hinterlands from their own wealth. And I think part of that is, part of that could happen in a broader imperial project or within the nation state itself, when you're displacing resources, say, from a productive Algerian hinterland, the Sahara, where oil is extracted, towards more the urban center or even the metropolis in France, where the bank accounts lie. And then the municipality is left without much resources. So I think part of our premise is both kind of disciplinary, but also specifically unevenly geographic. And I think this drawing from the After Oil series captures some of that, in that what it does is it juxtaposes the kind of accumulation of wealth in the form of the high rises, the skyscrapers that were produced in Dubai, as a timeline. So you can read it from the surface to the depth in terms of the kind of the oldest to the most historically recent, but you can also read it as a geological section of oil excavation with respect to these various periods of extraction. And of course, the deeper you dig, the higher the buildings become, the more wealth is accumulated on the surface. So that's a way of always reading the visible signs of wealth on the surface in relationship to areas of the earth that are excavated, depleted, sucked literally for their resources. And I think that, that worldview comes from someone who wasn't brought up in the center. I think the possibility of seeing that is one of not normalizing wealth or symbolism as the prevalent condition of the world, but understanding that in various projects for renewable energy, for example, that violence of abstraction continues to haunt much of, say, the deserts of North Africa, where you see it only populated with a few caravans of camels in the background. And, that no people, no ecologies, just the possible deployment of solar fields continues to be a prevalent paradigm. So I think kind of inhabiting that imaginary, its histories and its future is essential to have a vision of a future that, you're not just displacing one technology in favor of the other, granted the polluting fossil fuels in favor of fantastic solar, but you're also changing your social contract of the world so that it's inclusive of these lands that are productive and not kind of dismissive of their concerns and inhabitation.
And Hadi, I feel like you're about to say something. Are you?
No, yeah, I actually, I think it is important that we understand that this is a global world, and somehow there is a power system that pushes and that assigns, roles to center and periphery, and a lot of, and we come from, peripheral countries, and maybe a lot of these countries have gone through some of these transformations, such as the Sahara Desert, where a lot of oil has been extracted, but also where a lot of landscapes have been damaged and a lot of water has been polluted. And so now we're talking about shale oil, shale gas, and this is becoming also the next issue to be solved. And so we would like to also talk about this kind of geography of power and the position of the peripheries in this system.
Let me ask you what is maybe a very unacceptable question. If we think about the future of, going back to the title of this talk, if we think about the future of design, right, and the future of these types of conversations over the next months, years, decades, and this is a bizarre question, but what do we stand to gain, maybe, by addressing these challenges head on? And is that sort of type of thinking very clear? And the reason why I ask this is because I feel like if there isn't a clear sort of, pitch is not the right word, but a very clear understanding for what we stand to lose and what we stand to gain if we don't actually address these challenges head on. I feel like it's almost like just running uphill with no clear source of momentum. So as you think through some of the challenges that you're writing about and creating work on, who are you sort of speaking to? Who are you speaking to with After Oil specifically, right? It was part of the pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Who are you speaking to? What is the sort of the message that you're having them receive?
Should I?
Yes, Rania.
Yeah, go for it. Does my question really make sense? It's a bizarre question. I'm curious, like, where is the source of momentum to be able to start asking and answering these questions, not in a single voice, but in sort of a chorus of people?
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but I can, there are maybe multiple questions in there. I think, I don't think you're asking about what is the incentive to generate. I think maybe it's a question of audience, like who are you speaking to? And I think, you often speak to those who listen, because those who do not want to listen will not listen. Those who want to listen are people who might be interested in it as a thematic concern. So After Oil is is partially, you know, the after oil is both kind of the quest of what happens if you keep on following that oil, if you persist in relying on oil as a primary mode of energy, but it's also an imagination of a future that follows the era of oil. And I think we were surrounded with images of what that often green future is represented to be. And it was a future in which what Hadi was just saying, the scorched landscapes of the current mode of energy are not in representation. It's just like what technology gives you, you only take its value, you dismiss its externalities, and then you move on to the next best thing. Yeah. What happens is that you forget that technologies always have a cost, and you're just not admitting, not reckoning with resolving the damages that oil has brought about, as well as just displacing the same wild desires onto whatever next mode of energy is. So you kind of fall into idealism again, you know, not very dissimilar from ads in the kind of post-World War II period, where you had oil from Aladdin's lamp. Oil was promised to be the mode of energy that would bring development, liberation to kind of developing and the developed worlds alike. It was, you know, it was promised to be the miracle cure, and it is highly concentrated forms of energy, so you can understand the appeal. But it's not at the same time at which we realized its externalities that we began to talk about them. It was only many decades later that, you know, now it's becoming a clearer issue. So I think part of that is kind of is an imperative to embed these externalities into any narrative on technology that we come to inhabit, that there is always a cost, and, you know, you're going to have to weigh your budget of what you're willing to pay for it and who's going to pay for it and what you're willing to ignore and dismiss. Yeah. And some of these costs are immediate and some are on longer term, and some are geopolitical in the immediate sense of nations battling for a resource, and some are geopolitical in the sense of the politics of the earth and a broader geopolitical sense. So
so somehow I think there is a desire, or there is a belief in public space, and it's sort of the audience is the public, and is to create publics, to gather publics around these concerns. So I think the agent is aesthetics, is the drawing, and the image is a way to gather these publics, and this is the first step. You know, when the public is there, then, you know, the second step is to learn more about, you know, some of these concerns, right? So the first catch is the image in itself. It's aesthetic. And this one is a good example. It's geometry. It's references. It's political situation. But then when you try to understand what's behind it, you open a door to something much more complex, that is about ecology, that is about real estate, that is about competition, that is about sea level rise, that is about the price that we all will have to pay if, you know, oil is extracted and keeps on being extracted without any concern for, you know, the temperature elevation, at the temperature rise. So, and
I'll just add two things, Hadi, just if I may, because I know that we're, you know, rushing against time. One is that these drawings, we're reading half of Geostory. Geostories is a text on one page and an image on another. So what seems opaque is in part because of that parallelism that is not here. But it's also that we've come to recognize, you know, 5 years after producing this work, that there are formats that are in themselves more publicly accessible, disseminatable. So things like a graphic novel or an animation in which the text and the image become more integrally kind of meshed together might be more accessible than a sense of an architectural drawing that is still compacts a lot of information and asks a lot of work from the viewer, if we are to understand viewers as outside of the discipline as well. So that's where, you know, some later work can maybe moves from a disciplinary project of understanding urban technologies to become more truly the public project that Hadi was discussing.
Okay, great. I want to ask one last question to both sides, and I'll start with Foundland. When we think about future of design, let's just talk about the future of your collective. I'm curious what you suspect you're going to both be working on over the course of the next sort of 5 years. What are some of the key problems that you're looking to explore, or key sort of solutions that you're looking to etch out? Ghalia, you want to go for it?
Yes, well, we've been working with each other for 12 years now, so already it's an achievement. I think and I think we sometimes describe our collaboration as the real artwork, like as how we two kind of evolved together, shared things together, and also like worked on and traveled together, investigated things together. So I think this collaboration is also like a part become part of our identity as well. And if you observe our work in the last 10 years, like the topics that we've been working on and developed, we were very interested in the events that happened in 2011, and we were focusing on topics like migration, but for sure we have a different, I think, focus than Rania and Hadi. We were really more interested in personal stories. So we kind of tackled those big themes by being personal, by telling like individual stories, and try to find, to design a way to collect those stories so they make kind of like to create a different narratives to what people actually know about them. At the moment, we are really working on a very exciting project called Real-Time History. It's investigating digital archives related to the all kind of journalistic material coming from Syria that actually documents conflict or documents war crimes. And we are working with an amazing group of people investigating the future of this archive, the meaning of these images. We are trying to create work that bring all these kind of perspectives on this material, from starting from the image makers, the people who collect this material, preserve it, also people from the legal entities and human rights activists, how they look at this material. And we're trying to bring all these people together to discuss actually this kind of new emerging archives.
Very cool. Hadi or Rania, you want to tell us what you're working on right now, what you expect to be working on in 5-10 years since we're about to solve the global climate crisis in the next year or so. So there'll be something new to work on. That's a joke, by the way. Yeah, Rania, go for
it. Some of the work start from something that bothers us in the stomach in the moment itself. And given where the world is, it promises to have many of those episodes, as you rightly said. A short work, and we're hoping maybe to develop more in relationship to that, is a short fable we've done, kind of a 6-minute animation called The Elephant in the Room. It's kind of like what happens if Dr. Seuss continued work on the climate crisis, but approached it to kind of an intergenerational, to people from different ages to think about it. We're doing that, but I think we're also, some of that is slowly becoming, as Ghalia maybe pointed, more autobiographic. Somehow it seems that the challenges of a planet as a whole are sometimes a good hiding spot from challenges that the region and its catastrophes offer us personally, and maybe sometimes that hideout fails. So some of the work that we've been thinking of is not only the recent collapse of Lebanon, the explosion of 2020, but the broader systemic inequities that have underpinned the system kind of literally with a few pins for the better half of the last 2 centuries. So I think it's slowly becoming in like other narratives. I mean, our work is often situated, so it takes a place in the world as the basis to tell the story, but maybe often these places were not places that were hard for us to digest or think of. They were there at some safe distance. And it just seems that maybe, and I'm not sure we can handle the toll of such an operation, but maybe we can see if we can address that in a way that makes sense to more than just us in the process.
Okay, great. So we're going to open up to questions. Right now we have 5 questions. I'm going to start with Basma. Basma, if you can do your best to try to address somebody, so so that we know who should answer it. If you can, then just ask the panel. Go for it.
I think I was hoping to ask all 4 of you, but yeah, I mean, can you talk about what it means to be from the region, right? So maybe your identity belongs to the region, but also you've been educated in the West, you work in the West, some of you work in Western institutions. So I'm wondering, like, how do we avoid these like binary categorizations of East and West? Do you think that's valuable or invaluable? Do you see yourselves as like situated within sort of the Manasa region or the MENA region or the Swana region, or do you see your work more resonating with a global? I know that all of your works are resonating with a global audience, but yeah, it's just about this like kind of categorization of East and West and how people like to sort of place us or place you within, yeah, they're making work within the Middle East or they're making work within the West. So can you comment more about that or talk more about that?
Great. I'm going to just put someone on that. Lauren, did you unmute on purpose? Okay, I'm going to put Ghalia on the spot just to start out, because you're currently teaching in the Arab world, and then it would be great to have somebody in the US or somewhere else chat about it.
Yeah, I think for me personally, things changed. No, maybe like in the beginning, I was thinking, okay, I'm in between those 2 worlds, and like this is a kind of a reality we can't change. You know, like I've been educated in the West, but I think my focus is about like maybe focusing on my like the inner circles, like not so much trying to find something that it's meaningful for me, and this is something like I always discuss with Lauren, like really our position to whatever topic we are trying to address, like really being transparent about our intentions, motivations, why we are doing it, why we care about it in the first place. So I think this is really like the question of care and love and being transparent about also our methods and how we approach any topics or people we're working with, and also how we do like how we work with our students. I think this is really, it become for me the core of design education, is to create this connection between like young designers and their surroundings, like to be able to reconfigure this relationship. Otherwise, you've been talking about okay, a global problem, but where are you from it? Why you care about it? So I think this is really this is like the first step. So it's not about East and West, it's about our relation to the topic or whatever like we're working on. I think this is like more essential than the labeling of it. Like if you have, like for example, me and Lauren, we always talk about like, she's South African, I'm Syrian, what is our both relation to the topic, for example. And I think her, like our collaboration and her involvement in the project was super crucial to ask the right questions, to maybe have a different perspective to the topic than like maybe my perspective would be sometimes biased or emotional, or so I think it's not about those labels. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Well. Hadi, if you want to respond in like a minute or two, so we can move on to the next question.
Yes, so I was born in Algiers, and I was for many years impressed by Albert Camus and The Stranger in particular. And I think a lot of our work, and I see Rania and my work as being a little bit like the work of Kamel Daoud, who recently wrote the Meursault investigation, talking about the Arab that was killed in The Stranger, and talking about the same story, but from the perspective of that Arab. So the aspiration is a universal aspiration, but the point of view is a little bit different. Basically, so we aspire to think about universal issues, but our departure point is a little bit different. Our references are a little bit different.
Oh, can you just say the name of the book one more time?
So the Merceau,
not Camus' book, yes.
Yeah, the Merceau investigation by Kamel Daoud.
Okay, perfect. All right, the next question comes from Diane.
Oh, there I am. Okay. Hi, thanks, Mikey. So you both talk about alternative systems of Western being and knowing. So Isabel Stinger's Decolonizing Education, for example. But there is still a very powerful commercial capitalist design scene that is really only concerned with consumption and promoting capitalist systems. So in general, I'm curious to just understand your thoughts on that. How you approach it, how you navigate it, how you sort of reconcile with it.
Cool. Any takers on that one?
I mean, Lauren's mic is on.
Okay.
Go for it, Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, hi, Diane, by the way. Nice to see you. Yeah, I mean, I saw the question in the chat and I was thinking about it. And of course, it has to do with just the world we live in, that money drives also the projects that we ourselves are working on, I guess. And a lot of the projects that we've been fortunate to work on have been made possible because of public funding. So, I mean, that's something we haven't really spoken about yet at all. But that is just a reality, I guess. And then one could also say that we should, a lot of the funding that we accept comes from European sources, I would say, mostly. So I guess, yeah, what do we think of the big design world out there that is mainly commercial? Well, it exists parallel to what we're doing, I guess. And I think, yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. I mean, I don't think we exist in opposition to it, really.
I would like just to say that, there are also counter forces. If you look at Greta Thunberg's work, if you look at, the enormous, Black Lives Matter movement, if you see, the Thawra movements across the Arab world, the Hiraqs. So there are also counter forces that are proving that we are in a moment of transformation, and that I think we have to take a position in relation to these dynamics. And I think what some of us and what all of us, I think, are doing is to maybe make visible or expand on the significance of some of these issues, and as educators also to be able to discuss some of these issues with the students as well.
Absolutely. Great question. Okay, the next question comes from Sanjuti. I think I'm saying that correctly.
Yes. Hello. Hi, I just want to thank the amazing lineup and wanted to quickly ask, how can designers and researchers, rather design students and research students support problematic design education, especially when they're acquiring the design education from a non-native Western country? And a little bit of context to my question. I mean, I'm from India and I'm looking and thinking about pursuing my master's, but I am simply so conflicted with the idea of going to the Europe or to the States, because there's a ton of things. There's like student debt, and I want to subvert design education, but I'm just simply unsure. That's the question.
There are also fellowships and funding. So there are opportunities to, and I can speak for myself. I'm someone who had the possibility of pursuing 2 degrees while being supported. So that's part of the same maybe cultural system that Diane was referring to, is that it makes possible possibilities of exchange. It also opens up the possibilities of you charting a, a life path that doesn't necessarily return you to similar places, or might only by design. I guess it's like you're giving energy to a ball that then has its own path and direction. So it's that's maybe a small, I don't know, maybe that's getting too introspective. Are we at the round of the hour at this point? It often turns to become more existential questions. Yeah. Don't get yourself interested in that. If you can avoid it, don't take that route.
Yeah. Okay, so we have one final question from Jorge. Let's see if we can squeeze it in just in time. Jorge, I'm asking you to unmute. Are you there? Okay, let me ask the question.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I got you.
Hello, good evening to everyone. And my question was related more to the field, because I see that you guys are more into the academic field, and then more as when I work on a daily basis, I was more concerned about how we deal with the artificial intelligence as in the process of the design, since we humans are the ones who giving the logarithms for the artificial intelligence to work, but we are also on the same team. So how do you see the future of design? How you guys see the future of the design in this paradigm? How do we face this?
Great. Anyone can answer that in 60 seconds?
Well,
go for it.
Well, my students ask me the same question sometimes, and yeah, we for sure we realize this, like in terms of like tools and in terms of visualizing like the aesthetic part of the practice design, like it's been made like possible by a lot of digital tools and programs and algorithm and artificial intelligence. But I think the role of this is why we think about the future of design, that the practice should expand, and the role of designers should be beyond just working with or visualizing or even thinking about form. But like I think like, for example, empathy, like designers, like this is also what we think sometimes as teacher, what to teach those young kids, that they actually they can really work with tools that we have no ideas about as teachers. So I think we need to embrace technology. We need to also be on the table when it comes to developing those, like where those technologies are going to be, how they are going to develop those programs. So I think our position will be shifting a little bit. So instead of being end users of those technology, we need to sit on the table and think about the future of them, how to utilize them, how to also like I don't know, like, so I'm not I'm not afraid about the design practice being taken by artificial intelligence. I think we really need to be more flexible to embrace this new technology and see how to move on. And yeah, it's really like kind of weird answer to this question, but maybe this is another talk, Nikki, like how to address those kind of technological advances when it comes to design.
Well, thank you to all of you. We just hit the hour. Ghalia, Lauren, Rania, Hadi, thank you so much for sharing your time and perspective with us. It has been an enriching conversation. And thanks to the Tasmeem team. Please go to the Tasmeem social media and all that other stuff to find out more about the conference, which is going to be in March. And the next one of these events is, I believe, in January. So stay tuned for that. Should be a lot of fun. And this will show up on a podcast feed in a couple of days. So look out for that too. All right, everybody.
Thanks you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.